The galaxy froze in silence as a human child kissed the deadliest dragon ever born. The drawing had 12 colors in it, none of them right. Norah Wells was 7 years old and very serious about her art. She was lying flat on her stomach on the cold lab floor, feet in the air, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth as she worked. The creature on her paper had wings that were too big and a neck that was too long and fire coming out of its mouth in a shape that looked more like a flower than a flame. She studied it, tilted her head, and added more orange. Better. Her father, Dr. Owen Wells, was at his desk behind her, typing a report he had been trying to finish for 3 days. Every time he got close, something interrupted him. Today it was the sound of marker caps clicking open and closed in a rhythm that had somehow become the background music of his life on relay post-dusk. The station sat at the exact point where human-controlled space ended and Vethali territory began. It was not a comfortable place. The walls were thick, and the corridors were long, and everyone who worked there had learned to speak in careful, measured sentences because the wrong word said too loudly could restart a war that had been paused, not ended. The Vethali had agreed to the ceasefire. They had not agreed to trust anyone. Owen finished his sentence and looked down at his daughter. "You have marker on your cheek." "I know," Norah said. She did not look up. He almost smiled. He looked back at his screen. The report was about Drac. It was always about Drac now. 6 months ago, the final clause of the ceasefire treaty had been signed, and that clause had required the Vethali to surrender physical custody of their most dangerous asset to neutral ground. That asset was currently in a sealed containment bay 4 levels below where Owen was sitting, 14 meters long, ancient beyond any reliable dating. Responsible for the destruction of 2 colony worlds, 1 deep space relay hub, and 3 full military fleets before any faction had managed to even slow him down. The Vethali called him the Hollow Devourer. The human translators had tried several names. None of them sounded right either. The creature had eventually been entered into the station records simply as Drac, which was the closest phonetic match to the sound the Vethali made when they referenced him in tones that mixed reverence with dread. Owen's job was to observe and document. He was not security. He was not military. He was a xenobiologist who had been given a posting no one else wanted because he was the only person who had formally studied Vorath biology, and the Vorath were extinct. Except for one. A knock at the lab door. Owen called it open. Rin stepped inside, ducking slightly out of habit even though the doorframe was tall enough. Rin was young for a Vethali, which meant the color shifts under his skin moved faster than the older delegates, cycling through pale greens and soft blues without settling. He was assigned as cultural liaison, which mostly meant he spent his days being uncomfortable in both directions at once. He stopped when he saw Norah. Norah looked up, studied him with the complete honesty of a 7-year-old, and said, "You are changing colors." "It is how my kind show feeling," Rin said carefully. "What are you feeling right now?" Rin glanced at Owen. Owen offered nothing helpful. "Uncertain," Rin said. Norah accepted this and went back to her drawing. Rin crossed the room to Owen's desk and placed a data chip on the corner of it. Then he looked down at the paper on the floor. His color shift stopped moving. For a moment he was very still. The drawing looked like Drac. Not perfectly. The proportions were wrong and the fire was shaped like a flower. But the posture, the weight of it, the way the creature's head was low and its wings were folded close, like something resting rather than threatening, was closer than anything any adult in the station had managed to put into words. "Where did she see this?" Rin asked quietly. "She did not," Owen said. "She made it up." Rin looked at him. The color under his skin shifted to something Owen's training identified as unease. That evening, Admiral Sierra Dorn held the weekly threat briefing in the upper command room. Owen attended and left Norah with the station medic, who did not mind because Norah mostly sat quietly and asked questions about bones. Dorn stood at the front of the room and did not waste words. The treaty was fragile. The Vethali delegation had submitted a formal request, again, to have Drac released into open space rather than kept in containment. The Human Council had refused again, because an uncontrolled Drac moving through neutral territory was not a solution anyone could agree on. The standoff had no clean answer. If Drac died in that bay for any reason, the Vethali would call it execution, and the war would resume within a standard day. Owen listened and thought about the drawing. He thought about the way Rin had gone still when he saw it. He thought about the report he still had not finished. When he got back to the residential section, Norah was asleep on the medic's spare cot with marker still on her cheek. He carried her to their quarters and tucked her in and noticed that the drawing was folded in her pocket, the corner of a wing visible above the fabric. He left it there. She was 7 years old and she had drawn the deadliest creature in known space from pure imagination, and she had made it look like something that was simply tired. Owen sat in the dark for a long time after that, not sure what it meant. The galaxy froze in silence as a human child kissed the deadliest dragon ever born. There was a game the station crew played in the lower corridors, though no one admitted it was a game. They called it the count. The idea was simple. You stood at the observation window outside the containment bay, looked through the reinforced glass at Drac, and counted how many seconds it took before your body decided it had seen enough and made you step back. The record was held by a security officer named Beale, who had lasted 41 seconds before his legs moved without his permission. Most people did not reach 20. A few had turned away before they finished counting to 5. Owen had never played. He stood at that window for professional reasons, with a datapad in his hands and numbers to record, and he had trained himself to see what was in front of him as data. It helped, mostly. Drac had not moved in 9 days. He was in the center of the bay, head resting on his crossed forelegs, eyes closed. The containment bay was large enough to hold a mid-sized transport vessel. He filled a significant portion of it. His scales were dark, not black but the color of deep space where no light reached, and they absorbed the artificial lighting rather than reflecting it. When the vents cycled, his scales shifted, and for a moment the patterns under them moved like something alive inside the dark. Owen noted the posture. He noted the respiration rate, which had dropped again. He wrote the words behavioral withdrawal in his report and then stared at them for a while because they were accurate but they were also not enough. He had been reading about the Voreth for 6 years before this posting. Most of what existed in the records was military assessment and damage reports. Very little was biological. Almost nothing was behavioral beyond the context of combat. What he was seeing now, the stillness, the refusal to eat, the eyes that had not opened in over a week, was not in any file he had ever read. He thought it looked like grief. He did not write that in the official report. Later that morning, Rin found him in the corridor outside the bay and fell into step beside him without being invited. This had become a habit between them. Neither of them had named it. He stopped responding to the Vethali observers 2 days ago, Rin said. Delegate Paul believes it is defiance, a political statement. It is not defiance, Owen said. No, Rin agreed, it is not. They walked a few steps in silence. The station hummed around them, the sound of recycled air and distant machinery that you stopped hearing after the first month unless you made yourself listen for it. The Voreth were made, Owen said. That is the part I keep coming back to. They were engineered, bred for a specific purpose by a civilization that no longer exists, and then released into a conflict that ended before they ran out of things to destroy. When the war was over, the ones who made them did not come back for them. He paused. Drac survived everything. He survived fleets and weapons and time. And now he is the last one, and he has been in that bay for 6 months, and I think he simply does not see a reason to keep moving. Rin's color shift moved slowly, a deep blue rising and settling. Among my people, There is a word for a warrior who has outlived their purpose. It does not translate cleanly. The nearest meaning is something like, the one the world forgot to end. Owen stopped walking. He looked at Rin. Rin kept his eyes forward. Yes, Rin said quietly. We have a word for it because it has happened to us too. 4 levels up, in the station's residential section, Norah Wells was not where she was supposed to be. She was supposed to be in the small classroom room with the other 3 children on the station, doing the reading work that the teaching program had assigned. She had done the reading in 11 minutes. The program had not expected that. It had given her more reading. She had done that too. Then she had sat for a while and thought about the map she had found in her father's open files 2 days ago, the one that showed all the levels of the station including the maintenance vents. She was small. She had always been small. Vent access panel C7 on the residential level was held shut by 2 bolts that turned by hand. She had checked. She had her drawing in her pocket and a small light clipped to her sleeve, and she moved through the vent system with the focused calm of someone who had decided on a plan and was now simply carrying it out. The vents were not pleasant. They smelled like recycled air and old metal. They were just wide enough. She counted the levels as she dropped, using the rungs built into the vertical shafts, rungs meant for maintenance workers but usable by small, determined 7-year-olds. She moved without hurrying. She was not scared. She was curious, which to Norah had always felt like the opposite of scared, a pulling toward rather than a pushing away. She reached the grate above the containment bay. She pressed her face to the metal and looked down. He was enormous. She had known he would be big, but the knowing and the seeing were very different things, and for a moment she just looked, taking in the size of him, the dark scales, the stillness, the way he seemed to pull the light toward himself rather than reflect it. He looked heavy in a way that had nothing to do with his body. She said barely above a whisper, "You look sad." For 9 days, nothing in that bay had moved. One enormous eye opened. It rotated upward slowly and found her face at the grate without any searching, as if it had known exactly where she was. Norah did not pull back. She looked at the eye and the eye looked at her, and neither of them moved for a long time. The galaxy froze in silence as a human child kissed, the deadliest dragon ever born. The alarm did not go off. This was the thing that would confuse the security team later, when they ran back through the logs. Every system in the containment bay was active. Motion sensors, heat monitors, pressure readers built into the floor. All of them were working perfectly. All of them registered the small heat signature in vent C9 above the bay. Not one alert triggered, because every alert in the system was calibrated for a creature that was 14 meters long, and the thing in the vent was not that. Norah stayed at the grate for a while. The eye below her did not close. It did not blink. It simply watched her the way deep water watches, with a patience that had no bottom to it. She pulled the drawing from her pocket. It was folded in quarters and slightly soft at the creases from being carried around. She pressed it flat against the grate so he could see it. "I made this," she said. "It is supposed to be you, but I did not know what you looked like, so I guessed. The fire is wrong. Yours does not look like flowers." Drac did not move. The eye moved just slightly, tracking the paper. "I can make a better one now," Norah said, "if you want." She waited. She was good at waiting. Her father had once told her that patience was a skill, and she had taken this seriously and practiced it the way other children practiced kicking a ball or learning words in a new language. She waited with her chin resting on the back of her hand, and the drawing pressed to the grate, and she watched him the same way he was watching her, without deciding in advance what she expected to happen. His head lifted, just slightly, just enough that the angle of the eye changed and she could see more of his face, the heavy ridges above the eye socket, the way the scales changed texture near the jaw, smaller and flatter there than on the neck. "You moved," Norah said, with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose theory had just been confirmed. 3 levels up, A junior security officer named Pell was doing his routine scan of the lower-level feeds when a number on the heat map made him stop. He looked at it. He looked at the location marker beside it. He looked at the containment bay feed. He called his supervisor. His supervisor called Owen. Owen was in the corridor near the research wing when his communicator went off. He listened to 4 words and then he was running. Rin was closer to the containment level. He arrived at the observation room first and pressed his hands flat against the glass and looked through it and saw something that made every color drain out of his skin entirely. He had heard the word impossible used casually by humans for small things, minor surprises, everyday frustrations. He had never understood why they wasted such a significant word on small things. He understood now, because he was saving it for this. Norah was at the grate, still talking. She was describing the drawing to Drac in detail, explaining which colors she had used and which ones she thought were wrong. Drac's head was raised fully now, the full weight of his attention directed upward at the small face behind the metal. His tail had shifted, just the tip of it, a slow movement that the Vethali behavioral files classified as engaged. Rin had read every Vethali behavioral file on Drac that existed. He had never seen the word engaged used in any of them. Not once. Not even before the containment. The files used words like advancing and striking and withdrawing, never engaged. Owen arrived at the observation room 30 seconds later, breathing hard. He saw Rin's face first and felt his stomach drop. Then he looked through the glass. He did not make a sound. He was not sure he could. He moved to the vent access panel in the corridor, the one that connected to the shaft above the bay, and he crouched in front of it and spoke through it as calmly as he could manage with his heart trying to leave his body through his ribs. Norah. Her voice came back immediately unbothered. "Hi, Dad. I need you to come back through the vent. I am talking to him. I know, come back through the vent." A pause. He could hear her thinking. "He is listening to me," she said. "He was not moving before and now he is listening. I think he was lonely." Owen pressed his forehead against the panel for exactly 1 second. Then he straightened up. "Norah, please." "Okay," she said. "Let me say goodbye." She turned back to the grate. "I have to go," she said to the eye below her. "My dad is here. I will come back and bring a better drawing." She lifted her hand in a small wave. The grate was older than the rest of the vent panel. It had been installed in the original construction and inspected twice since then, and marked as secure both times. What none of the inspection reports had accounted for was 6 months of slow micro-vibration from the containment bay below, which had worked at the mounting bracket on the left side, until the bracket was holding on by less than it appeared to be. Norah pressed her hand to the grate to push back from it. The bracket gave. The grate swung outward on its remaining mounting and Norah went with it, her fingers closing on the metal by reflex. And then the metal bent and she was falling, and the drop was 12 meters, and the alarms finally, loudly, went off. Every screen on the station turned red. Owen's voice in the corridor said his daughter's name in a way he had never said it before, and hoped never to say again. And in the bay below, Drac moved for the first time in 9 days. The galaxy froze in silence as a human child kissed, the deadliest dragon ever born. 12 meters is not a long fall. It takes less than 2 seconds. In that time, before Norah hit the floor of the containment bay, 14 things happened simultaneously across relay post dusk. Security bulkheads began closing. Every weapon port on the containment level powered up. Admiral Dorn was pulled from her sleep by an alert that used a sound reserved for 3 specific scenarios, all of them catastrophic. Rin slammed both hands against the observation glass hard enough to hurt. The Vethali delegation was woken by the alarm and Delegate Paul moved faster than anyone expected a senior official to move. And Drac crossed the containment bay in one motion. He did not lunge. He did not strike. He moved the way a large thing moves when it has decided to be somewhere else, with a speed that made the size of him irrelevant. And he was under her before she reached the floor. Norah landed on something that was not the ground. It was warm and it gave slightly and it smelled like hot metal and something older than anything she had a word for. She rolled, bumped against something solid and stopped. She lay still for a moment, breathing, doing the check her father had taught her when she was 5. Head, neck, arms, legs, all present. She was bruised on her left side. Her light had broken off her sleeve somewhere in the fall. She was otherwise in one piece. She opened her eyes. Drac was above her. Not attacking, not moving. Just above her, his head lowered so that it filled her entire field of vision, close enough that she could see the individual scales near his jaw and the way his nostrils flared slowly with each breath. His eye, the one she had been talking to through the grate, was level with her now. She could see herself in it, very small, looking up. She could feel the heat coming off him like a second skin. She sat up slowly. In the observation room, Rin had stopped breathing. He would realize this later and be embarrassed by it. Owen had arrived at the main bay door and was pressing his code into the panel with shaking hands, and Admiral Dorn's voice was coming through every speaker on the containment level telling him to stop, not to open the door, to wait for her authorization. Dorn herself was at the emergency control station 2 corridors away. Her hand was flat on a large panel, one deliberate press away from flooding the containment bay with a chemical compound that would disorient any organic life form in the enclosed space. It would not harm Drac. His biology was too old and too strange for it to do more than irritate him. It would put Norah unconscious in under 4 seconds. Dorn did not press it. She stood with her hand flat on the panel and watched the feed. Norah reached up. She put her small hand on the end of Drac's nose, on the flat space between his nostrils, and held it there. She said, "I am okay. Are you okay?" The containment bay was silent. Drac's breath came out in a long, slow exhale that moved Norah's hair back from her face. The force of it should have knocked her over. She leaned into it slightly and stayed put. Then he lowered his head fully to the floor, his chin touching the ground, his eye still on her. The motion was slow and deliberate and took several seconds, which in a creature of his size was the equivalent of a very careful, very considered gesture. He made a sound. It was low and long, and it moved through the floor of the bay and up through the walls and into the bones of everyone standing near the observation glass. The station translators, which were sophisticated enough to handle 47 Vethali dialects and 19 human languages, registered the sound and returned a single word: unknown. Norah did not need a translator. She had heard that sound before, in smaller forms, from smaller creatures. She had heard it from the station cat when Owen finally let it out of medical quarantine after a month. She had heard it from the injured bird she had found on Earth when she was 4, sitting in a box in the warm kitchen while her mother spoke quietly to it. It was the sound of something that had been alone for a very long time, finally in the presence of something that was not afraid of it. She leaned forward and kissed him on the side of his jaw, just below the heavy ridge of his eye socket, in the place where the scales were small and flat. On the observation feed, every frame of this was broadcast live across the station. The station's external relay was connected. It was always connected during a security event, a protocol designed to ensure that if something catastrophic happened, there would be a record. The feed went out. It went to the Human Council relay. It went to the 6 Vethali diplomatic vessels docked at the station's outer ring. And because the Vethali ships were connected to the Vethali communication network, which had no delay protocol for live security feeds from neutral stations, it went to every major receiving point in Vethali-controlled space. In the observation room, Rin's skin had gone completely white. Among the Vethali, color loss was not a sign of fear. It was what happened when the body's emotional processing simply stopped, because it had received something it had no category for. Dorn took her hand off the emergency panel. Owen, on the other side of the bay door, slid down the wall and sat on the floor. Norah was still sitting next to the head of the deadliest creature in known space, her hand resting gently on his jaw, speaking to him in a quiet voice about the better drawing she was going to make. The galaxy, for a long and breathless moment, had nothing to say. The galaxy froze in silence as a human child kissed the deadliest dragon ever born. The Vethali High Council meeting started before anyone on Relay Post Dusk had slept. There were 9 council members, and they convened in a chamber that had not been used for an emergency session in 11 years, the last time being the moment when the ceasefire had nearly collapsed over a border incident near the outer moons. That session had lasted 6 hours and produced 14 documents. This session produced no documents. For the first 4 minutes, it produced no words either. The council watched the feed replay. Then they watched it again. Then one of the senior members, a figure old enough that her skin had mostly stopped shifting, asked for it to be played a 3rd time. On the station, medical had cleared Norah. Bruised ribs, a scraped elbow, a cut on her palm from the grate. She had been given a bandage and a Nutri-Pack and had asked for paper and markers before she was fully off the examination table. Owen sat next to her bed and did not speak for a long time. He was doing the thing parents do when they have been very frightened, and the fear has not yet finished leaving their body, which is to sit close and pretend they are calm. Norah was drawing. Delegate Paul arrived at the medical bay without sending ahead. He stood in the doorway in a way that filled it, which was simply the nature of full-grown Vethali in human-sized spaces, and looked at the small human child with the bandaged hand who was already working on a new drawing with her unbandaged one. His skin shifted through several colors quickly, and then stopped. He looked at Owen. "I have questions." "I have answers to some of them," Owen said. They went into the corridor. Norah did not look up from her drawing. Paul asked the first question without preamble. How did she know he would not kill her? Owen thought about how to say this correctly. Then he decided to say it simply instead. She did not know. Paul was quiet for a moment. She did not assess the threat and determine it was manageable. No. She did not have information about his behavioral state that suggested he was safe. No, she had talked to him through a grate for maybe 10 minutes. That was everything she had. Another silence. Paul's skin cycled through a color Owen's training recognized as deep cognitive processing, the Vethali equivalent of someone pressing their fingers to their temples. She simply decided to reach up and touch it. Yes. Without data. Without data. Paul looked at the door to the medical bay. Through the small window in it, Norah was visible, still drawing, her tongue at the corner of her mouth. This is not considered reckless among your people. Owen breathed out slowly. It is considered reckless. She will hear about that from me later. But there is a particular kind of recklessness that human children have that is different from adult recklessness. Adults are reckless when they have weighed the risk and decided to ignore it. Children are sometimes reckless because the weight and the risk simply do not register. She was not brave in the way you might be thinking. She just did not think about it the way an adult would. Paul considered this for a long time. On my world, he said finally, children are kept far from dangerous things. We consider it the first responsibility of a parent. We do too, Owen said. And yet. Rin appeared at the end of the corridor and walked toward them, stopping at a respectful distance from Paul while still being close enough to participate. He had been in the communication room since the feed went out, monitoring the Vethali network response. His colors were moving fast. The High Council is in session, he said to Paul. They are requesting your direct report within the hour. Paul nodded once but did not move immediately. He was still looking at Owen. Your daughter, when she put her hand on it, when she spoke to it, was she performing a deliberate act of diplomacy? The question was so far from anything Owen expected that for a moment he had no response at all. Then he said, she was trying to make a friend. Paul looked at him a moment longer. Then he walked away down the corridor without another word, which among the Vethali was not rudeness. It was what you did when you had been given something too significant to respond to immediately, and you needed time to carry it carefully. Rin watched him go and then turned to Owen. His voice was low. I need to tell you what the Vethali records show about Drax's history. All of it, not just the military summaries. Owen nodded. There are accounts, very old ones, from civilizations that encountered the Voreth before the war. Most of them describe the same thing, a creature that did not attack immediately, that waited. That seemed in the early accounts to be trying to determine something about the beings in front of it before deciding how to respond. Rin paused. The civilizations that responded with weapons never got a second chance. The accounts stop. Owen was very still. There is one account, Rin continued, from a small agricultural civilization that encountered a Voreth near one of their outer settlements. They did not have weapons capable of harming it. They had a child with them, a young one, and the child walked toward the Voreth before anyone could stop it. He stopped. What happened? Owen asked. The account ends there. The settlement survived. The records do not explain how. Rin met his eyes. Until now, we thought it was an error in the archive, a missing page. From inside the medical bay, Norah's voice came through the door, cheerful and matter-of-fact. Dad, I finished the new drawing. Can I bring it to him tomorrow? Owen leaned his head back against the wall. Down in the containment bay, Drac had not moved from the spot where he had lowered his head to the floor. But he was no longer still in the way he had been for 9 days. He was breathing differently. Slower, yes, but with a steadiness to it that had not been there before. Like something that had set down a weight it had been carrying so long it had forgotten it was carrying it. The station medic, reviewing the bio readings remotely, noted the change in her log. She sat with her pen above the paper for a while, not sure how to describe what she was seeing. Finally, she wrote the only word that seemed accurate. Resting. The galaxy froze in silence as a human child kissed, the deadliest dragon ever born. On the 4th day after the fall, Drac ate something for the first time in 3 weeks. It was not a significant amount. The station's automated feed system recorded it as a minor intake event and flagged it for Owen's review. Owen sat with the notification on his screen for a while. Then he forwarded it to Rin without a note. Rin, who was in the middle of a difficult communication with the High Council, read it, set his work down, and sat quietly for several minutes before picking it back up. The treaty revision meetings began without anyone formally announcing they were happening. Delegate Paul requested a private session with Admiral Dorn. Dorn accepted. They met in one of the small conference rooms with no official record requested, which was unusual, and they talked for 3 hours, which was longer than any single meeting between their parties had run since the station opened. No one on either side was told the specific contents. What everyone noticed was that Paul came out of the meeting moving differently, not faster, more settled. The revised treaty did not look like a diplomatic document when Rin first showed Owen the draft. It was shorter than expected. It used plain language. It had only one new clause that mattered, and that clause concerned a category of status that had not previously existed in any agreement between humans and the Vethali. Ward of neutral ground, voluntary. The word voluntary was the important one. Drac could not be held. Everyone had always known this. The containment bay was not a cell so much as an agreement, a formal acknowledgement that Drac was staying because no one had given him a reason to leave. The new clause simply made that truth official and added one other thing. A line that the legal team on both sides had reviewed 3 times because none of them had written anything like it before. Authorized contact. 1 human minor, non-restricted, accompanied by 1 supervising adult. Owen read it twice. He went to find Norah. She was in the small common area near the residential section, sitting at a table with Rin and 3 of the Vethali junior staff who had, over the past 4 days, developed a habit of drifting toward wherever Norah happened to be. She was teaching them a card game with a battered deck she had brought from Earth. The game appeared to have rules that changed based on criteria that only Norah fully understood. The Vethali junior staff were losing consistently and seemed to be enjoying themselves in a bewildered way. Rin was watching with an expression that, on a human face, would have been called fond. Owen told Norah about the clause. She looked at him, so I can go see him properly, through the door. With me, yes. She thought about this for a moment with the seriousness she brought to most things. Can I bring my drawing? Yes. Okay, she said. She turned back to her card game. After this round. Owen looked at Rin. Rin's color had settled into a warm, steady amber that did not appear in any of the official Vethali emotional reference guides Owen had been given. He had started a private list of colors that Rin produced which had no official name. The list was getting long. They went down to the bay that afternoon, Owen and Norah, with the new drawing rolled up in Norah's hand. She had used better reference this time. Owen had found her an image from the station's biological files, and she had studied it for a long time and then drawn from it with careful attention, adding things the image did not show: the way the scales changed near the jaw, the shape of the eye ridge, the particular stillness of a creature at rest. The door to the containment bay opened. Norah walked in without slowing down. Owen followed her, and the fact that his hands were shaking slightly was something he decided not to think about. Drac was in the center of the bay where he always rested now. He raised his head when the door opened, which he had not done for any visitor before. His eye found Norah immediately. The tip of his tail shifted. Norah crossed the bay at her normal pace, the steady, unhurried walk of a child who has somewhere to be and is getting there. She stopped in front of him and held up the drawing. This one is better, she said. I used a real picture. Drac lowered his head slowly until his nose was close to the drawing. His nostrils moved. You can keep it, Norah said. She set it on the floor in front of him. Then she sat down, just sat, cross-legged on the floor of the containment bay, and looked up at him with the easy patience she had been practicing since she was very small. Drac looked back at her. The bay was very quiet. After a while, he curled one wing slightly outward, a slow and deliberate movement, opening a space beside him that was exactly the size of a small child if a small child wanted to sit in it. Norah moved over and sat in it, without making it a big thing. Owen stood at the door for a long time and did not say anything. He was thinking about the conversation he'd had with Rin, about the old account from the agricultural civilization, the missing page that had not been a missing page but a missing answer. He thought he understood now what had happened in that settlement, thousands of years ago. He thought it probably looked something like this. That evening, Delegate Paul sent a message to the Vethali High Council. It was flagged personal rather than official, which meant it was not entered into the formal diplomatic record. Paul did not usually send personal messages to the High Council. This one read simply: We have been thinking about these people wrong. We have been measuring them by their weapons and their wars and their damage. We should have been measuring them by their children. Their children have not yet learned to separate the world into what is safe and what is not. They simply walk toward what interests them and hold out their hands. After everything we have seen in this war, after everything the Voreth did to us and we did to others, a human child walked into that bay and offered friendship to the last of a dead species, and it worked. We need to renegotiate more than a treaty. We need to renegotiate our understanding of what these people are. There was no reply that night. The High Council deliberated. Outside the station, the dark between stars was quiet in every direction. Inside, in the bay with the lights on low, Norah Wells was asleep. She was leaning against the wing of the deadliest creature ever born, one hand still loosely holding a marker she had been using to draw on the floor until her eyes gave out. Her breathing was slow and even. Drac had not moved since she settled beside him. He would not move until she woke. For the first time in longer than any record could measure, the hollow devourer was not alone. And the galaxy, slowly, carefully, began to think about what that might mean.